So we are less than 15 minutes away from the exit poll being released. Joining us are Hyunsun, Professor of Public Administration at Myongji University, and Youngshik Bong, a visiting professor at Yonsei University. Good to have you on the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Professor Choi, let me start with you. It's the second snap election to be held after a president was impeached with the previous one following Park Geun-hye's impeachment in 2017. How would you define or describe this particular election?
Yes, as you said, today's snap election was triggered by the impeachment and removal of former President Yoon following his illegal and constitutional declaration of martial law in December 3rd, 2004. I think that this election is pivotal because it is aiming for the restoring the democratic stability and set the nation's course for the futures. I think that today we can see the voting turnout is very high compared to the previous presidential election was so high, but today we expecting like 80%. So we can see the South Korean people has a very strong public engagement and they are desire for the change. So I think the South Korean people want to see that we can overcome this illegal martial law, and then can we find the future through this democratic process? I think that's very important. So I think that today's election is maybe very determining the election for the future of Korea.
Future of Korea and restoring the system of democracy. That's
Right.
your definition of this particular election. And Dr. Bong, meanwhile, the country, as Professor Choi mentioned, witnessed the short-lived martial law some 6 months ago. And now it's holding a snap election. How would you assess the system of Korea's democracy and its resiliency?
The very fact that we are going to have a new president through peaceful and lawful presidential election, despite the fact that it happened to be a snap election for the second time in the less than 10 years, shows clearly the resilience and strength of Korean democracy. I'm old enough to remember the old martial law declaration in 1980s, and I would have, just like everyone else, have hated to see another declaration of martial law, which actually took place on December 3rd last year. But as your report clearly showed that it was a very short-lived martial law declaration and quickly closed through very peaceful and legal measures taken by citizens and the members of the National Assembly. And 4 months later, the Constitutional Court ruled in favor of the dismissal of the former President Yoon, and nobody got hurt, despite their varying opinions about his future and the decision of the martial law declaration. And 2 months later, after the Constitutional Court ruling, then through peaceful presidential campaign, the South Korean constituents are exercising their constitutional right to elect a new president. Again, nobody got hurt. So when you make comparison with other countries' demonstration of their resilience of democracy, like the United States, when the United States had to go through the violent demonstration after the election 2020 with Joe Biden as a new president, then I would say that despite all the shortcomings and dangers, the cases clearly demonstrate that South Korean democracy is well and alive.
As you mentioned, the presidential election in the U.S. And speaking of democracy, a social division and ideological conflict are nothing new, but they have been really highlighted more than ever this time. What would be the task of the next president with this issue in mind?
The main issue for this snap election to elect a new president in South Korea is, of course, the people's assessment of the declaration of martial law by the former president and his impeachment. So erecting the justice based upon common sense and rule of law should be the main mission for the next president, whoever is going to win the election tonight. And so dealing with a very highly polarized South Korean society and politics should be the first mission for the new leader. And it's going to be a very tall and difficult task, of course. But when you look at the global trend, South Korea is not exception to this global trend. And the polarization of politics may be regarded as a necessary evil, healthy sign of vibrant democracy. I mean, look at all the cases with very polarized politics, like United States, Italy, France, Poland, just elected new president, and Argentina. If you do not want to live with the necessary evil or growing pain to have maturing and vibrant democracy, then you would choose to live a country like Russia, China, and North Korea. So the choice for South Korean voters is clear that despite growing pains, this is what South Koreans want to live, want to have in their country.
Professor Choi, Dr. Bong mentioned that polarized politics are necessary evil, and I kind of agree with that. But should South Korea be concerned about extremism? Because the DPs, this time the DP's Lee Jae-myung had to give speeches behind bulletproof glasses, which was very unusual.
It is a very unusual situation, especially our extreme the polarization make like people have the less and less the trust among the people. So I think this is a very wicked cycle we have. So this is a big challenge for the new president. We can see the next couple of or next several hours. So new president to make sure the breaching among these divides and how can restore our public trust. So maybe the increase the social capital is maybe main goal for maybe our next new administration.
It's not an easy job, of course, we have to say. And Professor, you mentioned about voter turnout previously, and as of 7 p.m., this year's voter turnout stands at nearly 78%. It's already higher than that of the previous presidential election. In the 80s and 90s, the voter turnout was relatively high at over 80%, and the lowest was in 2007 at 63%. How does voter turnout affect the election outcome?
Yeah, normally the high turnout, the often reflect strong the engagement of the people, so can make the outcome more representatively. So I think in 1997 election, Kim Dae-jung was elected at the time over 80% or something like that. So I think at the time the people's desire and demand for the new, maybe the change something. So I think that we can see today's the turnout is like almost 78% right now, but it become maybe 80%. So that means we can see their desire. Yeah.
We will have to say. And Dr. Bong, this year's overseas voter turnout was the highest of almost 80%. This time, of course, we have to note that more polling stations have been installed, including in Cuba. What does this tell about voter engagement from overseas?
Well, the overseas voting participation is a very healthy sign that although they left the country temporarily or permanently, they still care a lot about the future of South Korean society and politics. So this explains the high rate of political engagement of the expats of Korea overseas. And there has been saying that the voters' engagement in this presidential election is a kind of lower than their engagement in voting in the previous presidential election between Mr. Yoon Suk-yeol and Mr. Lee Jae-myung, with 37% of the early voting rate. This year, the early voting rate is 34.7%, which is 2.2% lower than that of the previous presidential election. But there is a reason for the difference because this year, among the early voting days, there was no holiday, but in the previous presidential election, one early voting day happens to fall in the weekend. So many voters were able to participate in the early voting. So as a professor mentions, but we are still about 8 minutes away from having the final casting of the official turnout. But it's approaching 80%, which is the highest rate since 1997, when the turnout was 80%, compared to the two previous presidential elections, which had a 77.1% turnout and a 77.2% turnout. Something close to 80% shows that more South Korean voters at home and overseas really care about the future of South Korean democracy.
And would you tell us which groups are swing voters?
I would say that personally there was no specific swing voter group in this presidential election. That's very unique attribute of the presidential election this time. The fact that this is a snap election ahead of the official schedule of the 5-year term of President of South Korea says everything. As a snap election, it sucks in all the other agendas and issues compared to South Korean voters' desire to cast their opinion on the legality and the value of the martial law declaration by former President Yoon and his impeachment. The swing voters last time in the election between Yoon and Lee Jae-myung were voters in their 20s. The gender voting was very clear that in a 2-to-1 ratio, young South Korean male voters in their 20s supported Yoon Suk-yeol as their favorite candidate. On the contrary, in the 2-to-1 ratio, majority of the South Korean female voters in their 20s and younger supported Lee Jae-myung. This time, such a gender voting behavior is not so strong. So, as I said, that casting your opinion and judgment on the legality and the place in the history of South Korean democracy with regard to President Yoon Suk-yeol's decision to declare the martial law was at the center of all the issues in this election.
And Professor Choi, anything you like to add on the swing voters?
I think I agree with Professor Bong, but we can say the 20 is still the maybe key cohort groups who can swing the vote at the election. So I think that among the young generation, there are big divide, especially the male and female. That is so bad to our country. So how can we overcome that issue? So I think that still we have some regional issues. So some regions support for the People's Party, People's Power Party. Some regions still support more the Democratic Party. So these kind of divided in our country, maybe we should watch over, and then maybe we can see how it's going. And maybe I hope the new administration try to catch up some specific issues of some generation and the region.
Now that leads to my next question, actually. Is there any particular region, age, or gender that you're keeping an eye on? I also hear that voters in their 60s, their numbers really take a great proportion this year.
Yes, you are right. I think 1/3 of our population is now over 60s. They have a very big voting power. So I think there's a big groups, and they can actually swing the election. So I think that's why the two major parties actually announced so many maybe their promise about maybe pledges about maybe the senior generation. So that is maybe one of the big things. Also, the cohort of the 40 and 50 is very different. Maybe the voting pattern, they are more the progressive, and over 60s are like conservative. So that is our maybe persistent pattern. So I think the delay after we can, if we see the result of the election, we can see the same or there are some difference. for example, the Lee Jae-myung tried to make 30% about the support from the Gyeongbuk and in the Gyeongnam area. So that is a maybe new challenge.
And Dr. Bong, what should we be on the lookout for tonight?
Well, of course, we have to see the official result of the president election, who will be the next president of South Korea. But beyond that, if Lee Jae-myung of Democratic wins the election, then I'll pay attention to the interim government appointments for his presidential office, because as a snap election, there's no time that the new president can afford. So he has to begin his term for 5 years as a new president immediately tomorrow morning. So how he's going to organize his cabinet, like the prime minister and major cabinet members, would be very critical for us as constituents of South Korean politics to gauge what kind of governance and policies to be expected by the new government under the leadership of Lee Jae-myung. But if he fails to win the election, then he will suffer series of legal charges, and the future of him as a politician will be very difficult. If Kim Min-soo of the PPP wins the election, then not only will he be the new president of South Korea, but he will monopolize the control over the PPP, because he will have succeeded in this miraculous come-from-behind victory as a runner-up. Lee Jun-seok, the third-party candidate's future is also a point of contention, because he represents the generational change. If he succeeds in winning two-digit of support, like 10% or above, then it shows a bright future for Lee Jun-seok as an alternative to establishment in South Korean politics, as a viable alternative, especially among young South Korean voters.
All right, and now we're getting live pictures from the election situation rooms at the National Assembly. You're seeing on your screen right now the Democratic Party Lee Jae-myung campaign headquarters on the left, the People Power Party's Kim Min-soo headquarters in the right, and the Reform Party's Lee Jun-seok campaign headquarters on the right. Party leadership and campaign teams are present, patiently waiting for the exit poll release. We hear the candidates Lee Jae-myung and Kim Min-soo are staying at home, watching this. Do we see Lee Jun-seok here? Perhaps except for Reform Party's Lee Jun-seok, but we're not seeing him on the screen right now. We're just seconds away from the exit poll release. Right, and now it looks like the exit polls are out. You see their Lee Jae-myung campaign cheering and clapping, while the Kim Min-soo and Lee Jun-seok campaign are just barely moving and staying silent. The mood there looks contrasting. And of course, we will be sharing with our viewers the exit polls in about a few minutes. Professor Choi, based on what we're seeing right now, how do you feel about tonight's results?
I think we expecting the result we can see on the screen. I think but we realize in the time. So I think that we can see easily today is the winner, because maybe I think the margin of this voting may be big. I expecting that.
And Dr. Bong,
Yes.
I'll put the same question to you. What's your prediction based
Of
on
course,
what
the
we've seen?
polling exit polls are not official results of the election. So our voters and viewers should hold their breath and wait for the official counting of the vote by the National Election Commission. But I agree with Professor Choi that the margin of victory between the president-elect and the runner-up is a very important indicator of the voters' choices, because in 2007, when candidate Mr. Lee Myung-bak won the presidential election by huge margin, 22.5%, then the voters spoke their mind that resurrection of national economy was a top priority. So resurrecting liberal democracy and rule of law in South Korean society has been on the mind of voters as the most important agenda for this presidential election. And not only the victory itself, but the margin of victory are very important considerations for constituents in South Korean society.
For those just tuning in, you are looking at a live picture from the election situation rooms of the three major parties as the exit poll results were just released. We are going to be sharing with you the exact numbers in about 10 minutes. And I want to ask Professor Choi, during this past 3 weeks, the candidates have been very busy hitting the road, crisscrossing the country. Now, as they have the results, the exit poll release, of course, it's a prediction. What would be in their minds at this moment, watching this moment?
I think first of all, I think one of the main candidate, Kim Moon-soo, has maybe many thought. Maybe his start is too late. I think what happened in the PPP. So I think that result remind him a lot of things. He lost some time. He lost sometimes some important moment. But Lee Jae-myung he prepared. He was in the previous presidential election. Is a second opportunity. I think he was expecting much, but he didn't maybe thinking maybe how realized. But this moment, maybe candidate Lee Jae-myung maybe can say wow, something like that. So maybe make big difference. I can see another spot about the Reform Party. Maybe candidate Lee Jun-seok expecting more than 10%. Probably now the exit poll is not that way. So maybe he can remind him about the third televised presidential elections, the debate. Maybe he can lose that. If he would not lose the chance at the time, maybe he can make 10%. But the third the presidential debate, he made some mistake.
Let's just continue our conversation. A candidacy merger within the conservative bloc. It was really unprecedented. Involving the one with Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, but this time involving Kim Moon-soo and Lee Jun-seok. That did not happen. Do you think this would have affected the result of the race?
I don't think so. I don't see any exit poll yet, but I cannot see the combine and the unification of the two conservative candidates cannot surpass the result. The approval rate of the Lee Jae-myung. So I think that's not possible. Also, the vote who support Lee Jun-seok has a very different the demographic. So if they combine together, maybe they vote for some people vote for the Kim Moon-soo, but still there are some people vote for the Lee Jae-myung. So I think either way, maybe the candidate Lee Jae-myung, maybe I expecting he can win, whether it unified or not yet. That, yeah.
And Dr. Bong, South Korean presidencies have a tendency of a 5-year rotation. That means a change of government, liberals and conservatives taking turns to take the helm at the nation's highest office. How do you interpret this tendency?
Well, it's a healthy sign of a working and functioning a liberal democracy. The most important principle in liberal democracy is allowing the voters to exercise their rights to choose the government. So the government is subject to will of people, and a peaceful transition of power between two different ideological groups represented in the party politics is a very clear sign that South Korean democracy is, despite all the shortcomings, is functional. So if you see one-sided ideological bent that lasts so long in South Korean politics, then you may say that South Korean democracy has been on decay, not on its occasional resurrection. According to the exit polls, it seems like as a candidate, Mr. Lee Jae-myung of Democratic Party has won the presidential election with a margin of victory at approximately 12% to the runner-up, Mr. Kim Moon-soo of People Power Party. The 12% margin is, personally I think, smaller than expected, despite the fact that Mr. Lee Jae-myung was from the beginning a very strong candidate. We all remember that he barely lost the presidential election to former President Yoon Suk-yeol with a razor-thin margin, only 0.73%, less than 1%. So Lee Jae-myung himself was a very good presidential candidate, regardless of the fact that it was a snap election occurred by the impeachment of the former President Yoon Suk-yeol. So winning the election, despite the fact by only 12%, I would say only 12%, although it's in two digits, by Lee Jae-myung indicates that he has to do a lot of homeworks to dissipate the lasting concern and anxiety about him as a reliable and effective leader. His personal track record and his implications to many legal cases have been very heavily on the mind of the voters who might be in agreement with him and his party with regard to do something radical and very strong in response to the impeachment of the former President Yoon Suk-yeol. But they still remain hesitant to fully embrace his candidacy to support his election as a president. So there are many reasons for Mr. Lee Jae-myung, if he is going to officially elected to be the next president, to be humble and carefully and persistently listening to diverse voices in the Korean society.
And Dr. Bong, as you mentioned, and meanwhile, we're still getting that live shot from the National Assembly. And Dr. Bong, as you mentioned, so the new president has to start his work right away, tomorrow, immediately, without a transition team. What would be the new administration's top policy priorities?
Well, it's not
also facing a lot of challenges.
Right, definitely, right. So this is not an ideal time for anybody to be the president of South Korea. So I'm very sympathetic with whoever is going to be the president next morning, because he has to deal with so many urgent tasks right away. First of all, as we have discussed in this studio, that South Korean society is extremely polarized. So reducing the culture of hatred and opposition and misinformation should be one of the top priorities for the new leadership for the next 5 years. Upon this, South Korean economy is in the middle of trade war ignited by the Trump administration of the United States for its second term. The OECD just announced that the expected annual growth rate of South Korean economy has been reduced to 1% from its previous forecast at 1.5%. And even Bank of Korea predict lower the expected annual growth rate of South Korean economy under 1%, 0.8%. So dealing with economic challenges should be another priority for the next president.
So the next government has a lot on its plate. And meanwhile, as we speak, let's take a look at exact numbers. The joint exit polls done by Korea's three major broadcasters, KBS, MBC, and SBS, expects 51.7% for Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party of Korea, 39.3% for Kim Moon-soo of the People Power Party, and 7.7% for Lee Jun-suk of the Reform Party. Now, that result seems to show some gap between the two frontrunners, likely outside a margin of error. Of course, it's a prediction, and the final call will be made after all the votes are counted, but still. Professor Choi, what are your thoughts on the poll numbers? Are they in line with your expectations?
I can say yes, but I think the 51.7% for the candidate Lee Jae-myung is I'm sure. But I can see the very interesting between the Kim Moon-soo and the Lee Jun-seok. So the 39%, 7.7%, what is the meaning of that? So that's a very interesting point for the next, maybe how conservative the bloc move for the next steps. But I think that 51.7 for the maybe Democratic Party is meaning a lot because they can maybe do what they argue. Also, new president and the new government, they can maybe sustain their willingness about how we can maybe revitalize our economy and then the foreign policy and then the maybe government restructuring and the constitutional reform. I think this is a kind of magic number to me.
All right. Yeah. And Dr. Bong, your thoughts on the poll numbers?
Well, two thoughts. The fact that Lee Jae-myung is believed to have won the election with a 51.7% means that he's going to have a very strong mandate and support, like President Park Geun-hye did when she won the election in 2012 with a 51.6%. So two cases, the winners recorded more than 50% absolute majority. But at the same time, the fact that the victory margin is less than 14 or 15%, now it looks like Lee Jae-myung won the election over Mr. Kim Moon-soo with 12.4%. That's a little bit disappointing to Democratic Party. You consider the two facts that PPP is the party with impeached President Yonsei, and Mr. Kim Moon-soo never really apologized for the martial law declaration by former President Yonsei. But still, the PPP almost recorded 40% of entire votes. That means a lot with regard to voters' anxiety and mistrust in Lee Jae-myung as the next president.
That is a very interesting point.